In the winter haze of February 1943, London was a city cloaked in tension. The bombs had stopped falling nightly, but their echoes still rattled through half-ruined streets. Underground in government corridors, thick with tobacco smoke and whispered orders, preparations for the biggest military gamble of the war were already underway. The Allies were planning something massive, and they were desperate to keep it hidden. Major Charles Denholm was not a well-known figure. A mid-level intelligence officer assigned to an interdepartmental logistics unit, he wasn't the sort to command attention. But on the morning of February 14th, Denholm stepped off a train at Euston Station carrying a leather briefcase handcuffed to his wrist. Inside, according to now partially declassified files, were detailed projections of troop movements, logistical staging points, and the first draft of what would eventually evolve into the Allied invasion of southern Europe. What happened next is the subject of both official silence and unofficial obsession. Sometime between Platform 4 and the main concourse, Denholm collapsed. Witnesses recall seeing two men in gray coats kneel beside him, offering assistance. A railway medic arrived minutes later, but by then the briefcase was gone. So were the two men. Denholm survived barely. He would later claim to remember nothing of the incident. No autopsy was performed. No investigation followed. In fact, not a single official record confirms the briefcase existed at all. And yet, telegrams sent within hours to Churchill's War Cabinet mention a compromised item. Internal memos from the Special Operations Executive reference a total data loss that same morning. And in Berlin, Nazi intelligence received what they called an unusual influx of validated Allied material by the end of the week. What if the briefcase wasn't just lost, but delivered? What if the disappearance wasn't an accident, but a transaction? No one has ever recovered the case. No one has ever taken credit, and no agency has ever acknowledged that it was carrying battle plans that could have shifted the war, but someone, somewhere, clearly knew what was inside. The case of Major Denholm's missing briefcase might have faded into the background, an isolated wartime anomaly, buried beneath the chaos of global conflict, if it weren't for what came next. Because in the months that followed, across 3 continents, battle plans began disappearing. Not from enemy raids, not from sabotage behind enemy lines, but from inside Allied command itself. In April 1943, just weeks before the invasion of Tunisia, a sealed courier envelope vanished from a locked steel drawer aboard HMS Seraph, a British submarine used for classified deliveries. The envelope was marked Directive Northlight. The file reportedly contained contingency maps outlining an alternative approach route into North Africa, bypassing German strongholds. After it disappeared, the Germans laid mines along that exact route. The official explanation? Clerical error? Misfiled, perhaps destroyed. Yet no paper trail exists of its removal. The officer responsible for it, Lieutenant Hugh Tolland, was reassigned within 48 hours and never gave a statement. In July, during the Sicily campaign, a transport plane carrying 3 officers and a crate of operation charts went down in clear skies. The wreckage was found, burned, but intact. The officers were dead. The crate was empty. No bullet holes, no signs of looting, just silence. Then came Burma, December 1943. In the dense, unforgiving jungles east of Mandalay, Allied scouts discovered a dead drop, a hidden cache of documents stashed in a bamboo container, clearly intended for pickup. The contents? Fragmented pages from Allied engagement plans, and one weathered, torn map showing troop positions that had only been discussed in a secure tent days before. Only 5 men had been briefed. 2 were later court-martialed. No charges were made public. 3 theaters of war, 3 vanishings, no explanations, no accountability, and 1 shared feature. Each incident occurred shortly before a major offensive. Each one shifted the odds, not in the Allies' favor. Was it coincidence? A string of isolated mishaps? Or was someone on the inside feeding the enemy, one document at a time? The pattern was becoming too deliberate to ignore, and yet no one dared to say it aloud. What if the real threat wasn't outside the wire, but inside the room? In the spring of 1944, with the Allied invasion of Europe looming, the British and Americans launched a massive deception campaign to mislead Hitler's high command. It was called Operation Zeppelin, a shadow operation designed to trick the Nazis into believing the Allies would strike through the Balkans instead of France. It was clever, theatrical, and utterly false. At least, it was supposed to be. Zeppelin used fake radio traffic, double agents, and forged documents to sell the illusion. Ghost divisions were created on paper. Maps were altered. Soldiers posed for reconnaissance photos in uniforms from units that didn't exist. The plan was to distract German forces and draw them away from Normandy. And it worked, to a point. But buried beneath the noise, something went wrong. Among the fake documents delivered to German intelligence, one particular file stood out. Codenamed Aquila, it contained what should have been nonsense. A fake invasion path through Romania, but within Aquila were actual troop strength numbers from Allied formations not involved in the Balkan theater. Unit insignias, shipping schedules, and precise deployment dates, all real. And here's the twist. Berlin believed it. The Wehrmacht repositioned several Panzer divisions closer to Greece and Romania. But their logistics division, bafflingly, also began reinforcing northern France, as if someone higher up suspected the lie and the truth at the same time. Historians argue over this point. Some claim the real details were inserted intentionally to give the fake documents just enough weight. Others insist Aquila was contaminated, that someone leaked classified troop data under the cover of disinformation. MI5 never confirmed the existence of Aquila, but British decryption logs showed German communications referencing Allied regiments that weren't supposed to appear on any enemy radar unless someone handed them the data. Did the Allies get too clever for their own good? Or did a mole use the fog of deception to slip the enemy a glimpse of the truth? Even now, Zeppelin is cited as one of the war's greatest feats of strategic trickery. But tucked inside its legacy is a file that doesn't belong, one that suggests someone was playing both sides. For decades, Operation Zeppelin was celebrated as a masterclass in wartime deception, a smokescreen so convincing it shaped German troop deployments in the critical months before D-Day. But in the late 1990s, a tranche of declassified files from Soviet archives raised a troubling possibility that elements of Zeppelin's fiction may have contained more truth than anyone intended. Among the files was a memo from Soviet intelligence addressed to Stalin's general staff, dated May 1944. It detailed enemy transmissions intercepted through German relay stations, listing Allied logistics data with stunning precision. The memo notes Allied units confirmed to be operating in Italy and preparing for channel movement. This information matched movements not announced until weeks later, information supposedly contained only in top-secret Allied planning rooms. More curious was a second file, labeled in Russian as Project Phoenix, which described an internal Soviet analysis of Allied deception campaigns. The report stated plainly that not all falsehoods are false, and warned that certain operations, including Zeppelin, may have functioned as carriers of true military disposition, hidden beneath exaggeration. If true, it would mean the Allies, in crafting a believable lie, may have overcorrected, blending just enough real data to make their fiction too close to the bone. British intelligence has always denied that any real information was embedded in Zeppelin's decoys. Yet some historians now question how the Germans reacted with such precision to certain parts of the campaign. Panzer movements in Hungary, naval deployments in the Aegean, even mine placements in Yugoslav waters, all suggest they were working from material that wasn't entirely fabricated. Was this an unintended consequence of trying to make a lie believable? Or was someone inside Allied command layering genuine data into false fronts for reasons still unknown? The line between deception and truth may not have been as clean as history suggests. And if the enemy acted on real information buried inside a fake campaign, the implications ripple far beyond Zeppelin itself, raising the unsettling possibility that the war's most brilliant ruse may have bled into betrayal. On the fog-choked morning of May 29, 1944, just days before the D-Day invasion, a train departed from Bletchley toward London, carrying one of Britain's most brilliant and least-known minds. His name was Peter Allinson, a 32-year-old cryptographic specialist who had recently cracked a German U-boat cipher variant ahead of Allied convoy routes. He wasn't a soldier, nor a spy in the conventional sense, but he held something arguably more dangerous, keys. According to Bletchley Park internal routing logs, Allinson had been tasked with delivering a freshly updated decryption protocol to Allied High Command. This protocol would allow intercept teams to read Luftwaffe signals in near real time, a crucial advantage in ensuring air superiority during the Normandy landings. He was traveling light, one small satchel, locked, chained to his wrist. He never arrived. The last confirmed sighting of Allinson was by a porter at Watford Junction, where he briefly stepped off the train to send a telegram. From that moment, he vanished. Neither the man nor the satchel were seen again. The train was searched, passengers questioned. No blood, no struggle, no broken window, just absence. British authorities labeled it a disappearance, but those who knew the contents of his satchel used another word, breach. To this day, Allinson's MI6 personnel file remains sealed, well beyond the standard 50-year classification window. An FOI, Freedom of Information request in 2003 was denied on grounds of national interest and operational security, despite the event occurring more than half a century ago. No family statements, no funeral, just a quiet omission in wartime records. Why would MI6 bury a simple disappearance? Unless it wasn't so simple, unless Allinson didn't vanish by accident but was intercepted, or worse, turned. The war was full of invisible battles. This may have been one we were never meant to notice. For every operation remembered, every strategy enshrined in textbooks, there are gaps, strange voids in the official record where details should exist, but don't. These aren't the usual losses of war. They're cleaner, sharper, more deliberate. Entire files gone without explanation. Radio logs missing from dates tied to critical events. Briefings referenced in one document never appearing in another. Like torn-out pages no one admits were ever written. One such absence concerns the lead-up to Operation Fortitude, the massive deception campaign designed to distract the Germans from Normandy. According to military archivists, Over 70 hours of radio intercepts from June 1st to 4th, 1944, have never surfaced, despite detailed indices confirming their creation. Even more telling, marginal notes in unrelated intelligence files reference those very transcripts, quoting lines that no longer exist. It gets stranger. In 1977, British Defense Ministry archivist Elizabeth Morgan reported that several sealed crates labeled SHAEF-G-2 intelligence reports were removed from Q archives under emergency review status. They were never returned. When asked about it in a 1994 interview, Morgan said simply, "We weren't supposed to catalog ghosts." Even digital copies prepared during Cold War-era microfilming efforts reveal the same gaps. On some reels, you can see the numbering jump. Document 342 followed by 347 with no note of omission, and the originals destroyed according to a 1982 registry due to redundancy. But redundancy doesn't explain why entire briefings on German counter-invasion planning, Soviet coordination timelines, and Allied airborne drop zones were quietly pulled, some as late as the 1990s. If these were clerical accidents, why do they align with moments of strategic vulnerability? Why were they erased long after the war had ended? Someone didn't just misplace history. They edited it. The question that remains is, for whose benefit and at whose command? In the chaotic aftermath of the Cold War, as Soviet troops withdrew from East Germany and archives changed hands overnight, a discovery was made in the basement vault of a defunct Stasi records facility in Berlin. Among thousands of decaying files, a slim black folder stood out, unlabeled, unindexed, and sealed with an iron clasp. Inside, a detailed, typewritten Allied invasion plan for June 6, 1944. At first glance, it looked like a relic of post-war espionage theater. A forgery, perhaps, crafted for internal use during Soviet intelligence training. But further analysis told a different story. The plan outlined the Normandy landings with unsettling accuracy. Beachhead names, landing craft numbers, airborne drop zones, even the deceptive maneuvers of Operation Glimmer, all accounted for, all documented weeks before the actual invasion occurred. The strangest detail? The plan didn't match any known draft of Operation Overlord in Allied archives. It was not one of the officially circulated copies among SHAEF, Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force commanders. It carried no Allied seals, no file number, no signature of origin. In fact, there was no name on it at all. Yet the content was undeniably authentic. Side-by-side comparisons with post-war declassified invasion blueprints revealed near-identical structures, word for word in some cases. The only major difference, peculiar section predicting a higher casualty rate in Utah Beach sector, an estimate that turned out to be eerily close to the actual figure. Who wrote this version? How did it end up in East Berlin, and why was it never discussed publicly? The CIA, when pressed for comment in 1993, called the document inconclusive and not of strategic value. British intelligence declined to acknowledge it at all, but if this wasn't an Allied draft, who else could have written it? And if someone else knew before the invasion even happened, what else did they know, and how deeply did they see into the Allied playbook? The mysterious D-Day blueprint found in Berlin quickly ignited debate among historians, cryptographers, and former intelligence officers. Was it a leftover prop from an elaborate deception campaign? A brilliant piece of Allied misdirection that somehow ended up behind the Iron Curtain? Or was it something far more troubling, a genuine intelligence leak hidden for decades under the convenient label of disinformation? One detail refused to sit quietly: The bottom of the final page bore two typed names, Colonel D. Havers and Commander M. Albright. Neither of these men appear in any wartime Allied personnel rosters. No service numbers, no unit assignments, no mentions in SHAEF logs, no pension records. It's as if they were invented or erased. British military historians, initially skeptical, proposed the document could have been part of Operation Quicksilver, a companion deception to Operation Bodyguard. But even then, the document's accuracy raised red flags. Misdirection plans were designed to deceive with just enough truth to be believable, not to mirror the real operation down to minor tactical decisions. French intelligence officials, given temporary access to the file during reunification, reportedly filed an internal memo stating, "If forged, it is the most accurate forgery we have ever seen." Then came the most unsettling theory. The file wasn't leaked from the Allies, it was built by the Germans. Some believe that through a patchwork of intercepted transmissions, human intelligence, and possibly moles inside Allied logistics, German analysts came closer to predicting the real invasion than we ever realized. And perhaps this document was their quiet triumph, a reconstruction that almost beat the clock. But if that's true, it means something darker. The Allies didn't mislead the Germans. The Germans figured it out and chose not to act. And no one, not even now, can explain why. In the final months of World War II, as Allied forces pressed from the west and Soviet divisions advanced from the east, the Nazi regime scrambled to hide what it could not save. Art, gold, weapons prototypes, all were packed into convoys and scattered across the crumbling Reich. But not every train carried treasure. Some, it seems, carried something even more valuable: information. On March 18, 1945, just weeks before Germany's surrender, a military train identified in surviving German records as Transport 76 Omega departed from the southern freight yards of Munich. Its manifest, partially reconstructed from intercepted radio traffic and post-war interrogations, listed two unmarked cargo cars under SS control, protected by a detachment of the 12th Panzer Division. The escort was unusually high for a non-munitions transport. What made this train different wasn't what it carried, but what it never reached. According to Allied air reconnaissance, the train was last seen near the foothills outside Berchtesgaden, Hitler's mountain retreat. After that, it simply vanished. No wreckage, no derailment, no trace of its cargo or its guards. Post-war intelligence reports from both British and American sources claimed that the missing cars may have contained stolen Allied battle plans, documents acquired through espionage, battlefield theft, or intercepted transmissions. One OSS report cryptically noted, materials extracted from North African and French operations believed to be in Alpine transport under SS control. Local rumors only deepened the mystery. Villagers in the Obersalzberg region spoke of strange nighttime detonations and blocked tunnel entrances. One shepherd claimed to see SS soldiers forcing laborers into a tunnel system with crates marked in English. Days later, the entrances were sealed, and those workers were never seen again. Was the train destroyed in retreat, hidden underground, or intentionally buried with its secrets? To this day, Transport 76 Ohm remains an enduring ghost of the war, a phantom of steel, fire, and pages no one was ever meant to read. In the decades following the war, the legend of the vanished train grew roots deep in Alpine soil. Treasure hunters and conspiracy theorists alike turned their eyes to the jagged peaks and forgotten tunnels of southern Bavaria, convinced that somewhere beneath the mountains, a sealed cache still waits, not filled with gold, but with war secrets too dangerous to be left in daylight. Throughout the 1960s and 70s, numerous unmarked entrances were found in the hills around Berchtesgaden, many leading to collapsed or deliberately sealed chambers. Some were confirmed to be part of the Nazi Redoubt project, an unfinished fortress complex meant to house elite forces for a final stand. But others didn't match known blueprints. Independent surveyors identified irregular voids in the rock, massive enough to conceal rail cars, but all attempts to excavate were met with sudden restrictions or safety concerns declared by local authorities. One 1984 expedition, led by a private historian, Franz Kohler, claimed to find a steel door embedded in bedrock, engraved only with the numbers 76. Before the team could break it open, their permit was revoked. The site was later purchased by a private firm and permanently sealed. Satellite imagery from the early 2000s, commissioned by a German documentary team, revealed patterns of unnatural thermal readings beneath the Schneeferner Glacier, as if machinery or concrete infrastructure rested beneath layers of ice and rock. Yet no official dig was ever authorized. What's so dangerous about a trainload of old papers? Some believe the cache may contain evidence of war crimes never brought to trial, or secret treaties drawn up in desperation as the Reich fell. Others suggest something stranger, a complete record of Allied leaks, coded files that could rewrite how we understand the intelligence war. If the train was buried, it wasn't to protect it from the Allies, it was to hide it from history itself, and perhaps it still waits, silent and sealed, in a hollowed mountain where time and truth were meant to be entombed together. Beneath the streets of Westminster lies the Churchill War Rooms, a labyrinth of concrete cables and urgency where some of the most critical decisions of World War II were made. It was here on the night of March 12th, 1945, that Prime Minister Winston Churchill convened a high-level meeting late and unannounced. But unlike the dozens of briefings held there before, this one left behind no trace. The only reason we know it happened at all is due to an anomaly in the War Room's usage logs. Between 10:42 p.m. and 2:15 a.m., the Prime Minister's command chamber was marked as engaged, level 4 clearance. The entry bears no attached agenda. No minutes were recorded. The stenographers were dismissed early. The Signal Corps on duty that night was reportedly instructed to hold all telegraph lines static. And the lone surviving steward recalled one thing. Churchill arrived alone, carrying a single envelope. What followed is unknown. Some speculate it was a discussion about Japan. Others suggest it was the first acknowledgement of Soviet espionage inside Allied circles. But whispers among intelligence historians offer a different theory, that the topic concerned compromised Allied plans, quietly recovered or intercepted, and what to do with them before the war ended, perhaps even how to bury them permanently. Years later, in 1971, a classified memo surfaced during a parliamentary review of wartime secrecy laws. It referenced the necessity of non-recorded discourse concerning Operation R, with the R never explained. The memo was signed not by Churchill, but by his wartime secretary, and was swiftly reclassified. What would warrant a total blackout from the man who documented everything? Why hold a conversation so sensitive that no witnesses, not even paper, could be allowed? Whatever Churchill learned that night, he took with him into silence. In the Churchill War Rooms, almost every major briefing, even those deemed classified, was subject to limited audio recording for internal security and archival use. Hidden microphones embedded in light fixtures and ventilation ducts fed into a magnetic reel system operated by the Signals Liaison Office. Most of these reels were destroyed post-war, but a select few were preserved, sealed away under a restricted archive known only as the B Cabinet Collection. Among them was one reel labeled March 12th, 1945, late session. It was long thought to be blank, simply mislabeled or left recording in an empty room. But in 1998, during digitization of the collection, audio engineers noticed something unusual. For the first 6 seconds, tape captures clear room tone, footsteps, the creak of a chair, the click of a lighter, then static. Not distortion, not silence, deliberate full-spectrum white noise, the kind produced not by accident but by intentional overwriting. The remaining 2 hours and 14 minutes were completely unrecoverable. Requests to examine the physical reel were denied. A technician who worked on the transfer later claimed that the static bore signs of signal jamming, as if someone had flooded the input with interference while the meeting was in session. But that would require technical coordination and forethought, not a simple malfunction. No other reel from the war years shows this kind of overwrite pattern. Who wiped it, when, and why? Most disturbing is the reel's final metadata tag, source security risk mitigated. A phrase never used in wartime protocols and one with no defined explanation in the British National Archives. It begs the question, what was said in that room that night and who decided the world should never hear it? Because someone didn't just erase a conversation. They erased its existence in the shadowy aftermath of World War II, with Europe smoldering and new borders hardening into iron curtains. Another war had already begun, not with tanks or planes, but with documents, intelligence, secrets, the kind of information that governments would kill to obtain or quietly trade to secure leverage. And in 1946, the Soviet Union made an offer the West couldn't ignore. At a closed-door meeting in Vienna, Soviet envoys approached British and American intelligence officers with an unexpected proposition: the return of captured Allied materials recovered from German strongholds in Poland and Czechoslovakia. Among the crates were weapons designs, intercepted diplomatic telegrams, and, most curiously, wartime operational plans bearing Allied insignia. The documents were authentic. They included portions of Mediterranean troop deployment schedules, RAF flight paths from 1943, and an early draft of the SHAEF logistical timetable. But many of these files were never reported as lost or stolen. Others were thought to have been destroyed during bombings or purged in post-war cleanups. So how did the Soviets acquire them? British records from SHAEF do not list these specific plans as compromised, yet the Soviet versions included marginalia, handwritten notes and revisions in English, using Allied terminology that suggested insider knowledge. One theory suggests that the Germans, during their final days, offloaded stolen documents to fleeing collaborators who were later captured by the Red Army. Another, more troubling possibility is that Soviet agents embedded in liberated zones accessed hidden caches, perhaps even those hidden by the Nazis for post-war use. But a third theory, whispered but never confirmed, posits that these weren't captured at all. They were copies. Originals passed to the Soviets during the war by a double agent embedded in Allied logistics. If that's true, it means the Soviets weren't just collecting war debris, they were retrieving their own dead drops. In 1948, amidst the first icy tremors of the Cold War, an internal CIA memo was circulated under high classification. It referenced a Soviet archive find, an Allied invasion draft titled Operation Nightshade. The file included full schematics for a second front invasion through Denmark, complete with logistics, timing, and projected casualty estimates. The problem? No such plan was ever officially logged in Allied records. Historians initially dismissed Nightshade as a Soviet fabrication, part of the psychological chess game unfolding across Europe. But details in the document proved uncomfortably specific. It contained ship designations used exclusively by the U.S. Navy's Atlantic Fleet. It listed code names for operations that had only ever appeared in internal drafts, some of which hadn't been declassified until the 1970s. More unsettling were the signatures. Scrawled at the bottom were 3 names, 2 genuine mid-level officers, and one that never existed in Allied personnel files, Major Arthur K. Leland. No service number, no rank record, nothing. Yet, in a separate British intelligence log from 1943, there's a reference to Leland's alternate routing memo. Somehow, he was real enough to brief, but invisible in the aftermath. So, where did the Soviets get Nightshade? Some intelligence veterans believe it was Cold War blackmail, a veiled threat. We know what you tried to do. Others suggest it was time-delayed sabotage, a long game played by an unknown party to destabilize post-war trust between Western allies. But there's one theory that refuses to fade, that Operation Nightshade was a fallback invasion plan, scrapped quietly, leaked deliberately, and then erased from Allied history to protect reputations, or worse, to conceal internal betrayal. If so, the Soviets didn't steal a secret. They held a mirror to one in the heart of liberated France in a repurposed hotel in Versailles. The Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, SHAEF, coordinated the largest multinational military campaign in history. The building pulsed with constant motion, messengers, maps, typewriters, hammering coded orders. It was a fortress of coordination, strategy, and secrecy. But one room, perhaps the most secure of all, no longer exists. Referred to in passing by several officers simply as Section G-41, this room allegedly served as a micro-briefing chamber for high-risk intelligence handovers and compartmentalized planning. According to the recollection of a French maintenance worker who aided in electrical installations, the room had no exterior signage. Its door was camouflaged to appear as part of a storage closet. Entry required 2 keys and a verbal cipher. Yet no official blueprints from the era, neither American, British, nor French, show any structural evidence of this space. In fact, the 1944 layout shows a concrete wall where this supposed room would have been, but multiple veteran officers described attending briefings there. Even General Omar Bradley's aide wrote in a 1952 memoir draft, met briefly in G-41 to discuss possible breach routes. Most of what was said was redacted later. That draft was never published. The section mentioning G-41 was removed in the final manuscript. When renovations began on the building in 1963, contractors attempting to widen a hallway reportedly encountered a reinforced door embedded in the wall, sealed with a steel weld, and painted over multiple times. Before the team could access it, military personnel arrived, removed the obstruction, and replaced the wall. No explanation was ever recorded in renovation logs. So what was kept in G-41? And more importantly, why was it erased so thoroughly? Erasing a room isn't just about removing physical evidence. It's about deleting memory. The kind of memory that might explain missing files, compromised plans, or conversations never meant to be documented, and somewhere behind that wall, the war might still be echoing, locked behind steel and silence. In 1976, decades after the guns of Europe had fallen silent, a quiet voice emerged from the fog of buried wartime history. Margaret Templeton, a former administrative clerk, with SHAEF's G2 intelligence division, reached out to a retired BBC journalist named Alan Northcote. Her message was brief but loaded. I was part of the cover-up. There are things you should know. Some rooms were never on the maps. Templeton, by then living in a modest flat outside Birmingham, agreed to a recorded interview. She claimed that during the summer of 1944, she had been assigned to organize paper records for special transmission and storage, orders that came not from her direct supervisor, but from a visiting American officer whose name she didn't know, whose badge bore no standard insignia. Over 2 late-night sessions, Templeton described watching high-level operational documents, invasion drafts, casualty forecasts, and alternate surrender protocols being boxed, stamped with red wax seals, and labeled not for SHAEF, but for Operation Residue. She noted that some boxes were walked into G-41 and never came out. Others, she said, were driven to an unmarked rail depot east of Paris. What troubled her most wasn't the secrecy. It was the fact that none of those plans were ever discussed again. Not in press briefings, not in post-war memoirs, not in the archives. Then, during the third session, something went wrong. Halfway through a sentence, I remember the man's voice. He said, if anyone ever... The tape cuts to silence. Not static, not malfunction. Just an abrupt stop. Templeton never contacted Northcote again. She was later reported missing by a neighbor. Police found no sign of struggle. Her belongings were undisturbed. The tape recorder remained on the table. The official investigation lasted less than 2 weeks. No body was ever found. No explanation was given. Some things, it seems, are designed not just to be hidden, but to consume the people who remember them. In October of 1982, under quiet and highly unusual circumstances, a sealed diplomatic package arrived at the Apostolic Palace in Vatican City. It bore no return address, only a hand-embossed insignia, a Z inside a triangle surrounded by the words "Eyes Only," Zeta. The courier, a Swiss intermediary with ties to multiple European intelligence agencies, offered no explanation for its contents, only that it was a matter of conscience. Inside the package, according to a Vatican archivist who later leaked a description to an Italian journalist, were wartime documents, dozens of them, typed in English, dated between 1943 and 1945, and marked with security classifications no longer in use. Ultra Black, R-Class, no file copy. One file reportedly described a contingency invasion plan into southern Germany using an unacknowledged Allied battalion never listed in post-war troop records. Another referenced Directive Zeta, a term with no known connection to any documented military operation. Most startling, however, was a handwritten note included in the envelope. In Latin, it read, Fiat lux in tenebris, let there be light in the darkness. It was unsigned. Rather than contacting Allied governments or international intelligence services, the Vatican sealed the folder inside its secret archives under a designation typically reserved for materials of doctrinal sensitivity, not wartime intelligence. Requests for access have been repeatedly denied. Even high-ranking scholars within the Church have been unable to view the documents, reportedly kept in a chamber typically used for centuries-old papal correspondence. Why would records concerning Allied war operations be routed to the Vatican? Of all places, why not a national archive, a museum, a military depository, unless the sender believed these weren't just strategic documents, but moral burdens? Perhaps what was inside wasn't about tactics or logistics at all. Perhaps it was a confession. Among the thousands of operations conducted or conceived during World War II, Zeta stands out not because of what is known about it, but because almost nothing is. No official Allied or Axis record lists an Operation Zeta. No declassified war plan, no soldier's memoir, no after-action report mentions the name. And yet, beginning in the 1950s, references to it start appearing quietly, cryptically in Cold War-era CIA internal logs. One such log, dated 1954, notes a sensitive file transfer. Project Zeta protocols remain restricted under joint US-UK agreement. Another from 1961 describes reassessment of residual Zeta assets in southern Europe. No context is given, no descriptions follow. These weren't public documents. They were internal routing slips and clearance flags, used only when something classified was being moved or reevaluated. But if Zeta never existed, what was being moved? A former CIA archivist, speaking anonymously in the early 2000s, recalled seeing the term Zeta class clearance used in conjunction with post-war documents retrieved from non-military sources, including churches, private collections, and diplomatic channels. He described the files as logistically grounded but ethically radioactive. Even odder, the National Archives in the U.S. contain a redacted project index listing Zeta operations under a section for wartime misdirection, but with the notation never formally initiated. Possible ghost classification period. In intelligence circles, a ghost classification refers to a designation given to a project designed to remain unacknowledged, a name that exists only to conceal something else. If Zeta was never real, why does it keep appearing? And if it was real, why was it erased with such precision? Perhaps Zeta wasn't an operation at all, but a warning, a code name not for action, but for aftermath, the kind of aftermath no government wants remembered. For every parade that marked a victory, for every textbook chapter that laid out the progress of the Allied advance, another narrative lurked, hidden behind redacted memos, sealed crates, erased rooms, and plans that vanished before they were ever deployed. The official story of World War II is one of strategy, sacrifice, and eventual triumph. But in the cracks between those pages lies something far messier, something incomplete. Across continents and decades, the same pattern repeats. A briefcase goes missing in London, a Bletchley Park codebreaker disappears without a trace. An alternate D-Day plan turns up in East Berlin with no signature, yet shocking accuracy. A Nazi train leaves Munich and is never seen again. Sealed documents end up in Vatican vaults instead of national archives. These aren't isolated mysteries. They are pieces of a web, each connected by an unseen thread, the deliberate burial of wartime intelligence. None of this erases the victories that ended the war, but it calls into question how clean that ending really was. Who knew what and when? What was handed over, what was traded, and what was erased? And perhaps more disturbingly, why were these stories silenced? There are hints that intelligence wasn't just leaked, it was allowed to be leaked, that secrets weren't just hidden from the enemy, but from the future, to protect reputations, to conceal internal fractures, or to maintain the illusion that the war was won purely by strength and unity, rather than a chaotic scramble to control a world already reshaped by information, betrayal, and damage control. What if we've only seen half the war that was truly fought? Not the one on the beaches or in the skies, but the one that lived in back rooms, under false names, and behind walls that no longer exist. A war of secrets, one still whispering beneath the surface. In an age of satellites, firewalls, and encrypted communications, it's easy to believe that secrets are safer now, that digital oversight and surveillance prevent the kind of vanishing act once possible with a briefcase or a forged memo. But the truth is more complicated. If anything, the battlefield of secrecy has simply moved. The shadows are deeper and the trails disappear faster. In recent years, entire networks of classified data have been leaked, not through espionage rings or dead drops, but through flash drives, misconfigured servers, and anonymous uploads. Operation names vanish from Pentagon rosters. Intelligence files get wiped clean following political scandals. Cyber attacks erase months, sometimes years, of communication from government databases. Just like the missing D-Day drafts and erased SHAEF rooms, modern secrets often disappear with surgical precision. A document is marked restricted, then archived, then simply gone. And once it vanishes from the digital chain of custody, there's often no proof it ever existed at all. What's different now is scale. A single keystroke can erase or release terabytes of information, everything from diplomatic cables to covert surveillance footage. And unlike physical files, digital ghosts don't leave behind burned pages or abandoned tunnels, just silence. In 2023, a cybersecurity audit revealed that over 15,000 classified U.S. military files had been deleted without proper review protocols. The official explanation, system migration errors. But buried in that audit was a chilling line. Traceability compromised at root level. It's the digital version of Churchill's missing audio tape. Absence where there should be record. So, if this kind of disappearance was happening in 1944 with typewriters and carbon copies, what's being hidden now in the cloud? And what stories of war, of policy, of power are already gone before we ever knew to ask the right questions? Because history doesn't just repeat itself, sometimes it encrypts and vanishes.